you'll all take your seats, we'll start in 30 seconds. If you have a cell phone, please put it on silent, vibrate, or something like that. Welcome to the Armenian Museum. My name is Martin Eskejian. I'm the chairman of the museum, and we're here in the Sheen Chapel, which was designed by my father, Luther Eskejian, and started the museum downstairs. Today we have a very interesting program, and we'll get right to it. I'm going to have Rupen Biberian from Nasser come up and introduce the next introductory speaker. Rupen.
Good afternoon and welcome. On behalf of the Eskejian Museum and the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, we're inviting you to the 18th event that we've had so far this year. We're also going to have an event on November 15th at the Diocese. It's a book signing. And we're going to have a major conference at UCLA in December on the 300th anniversary of the Meconium order on St. Lazaro. Today, the topic is Armenia at the Met, Making Medieval Armenian Art and Culture Relevant, a talk by Dr. Helen C. Evans. Dr. Evans got her Bachelor of Arts degree from the Newcomb College of Tulane University in 1965. And she also had the honor of becoming the Alumni of the Year in 2005. She received her Master of Arts and PhD from the Institute of Fine Arts at New York University in 1991. She's currently the Mary and Michael Jahoris Curator for Byzantine Art. She's responsible for the acquisition, study, and interpretation of the museum's collection of early Christian, early Jewish, and early to late Eastern Christian and Byzantine art. She installed the Mary and Michael Joharis Galleries of Byzantine art in 2000 and expanded it in 2008. She also installed art in the Met's permanent galleries, Armenian art in the Met's permanent galleries in 2000. She's involved in many exhibitions, including Treasures in Heaven, Armenian illuminated manuscripts in 1994, Textiles of Late Antiquity in 1996, The Glory of Byzantium, Art and Culture of the Middle Byzantine Era, also which had Armenian art in it in 1997, Byzantium, Faith and Power, also with Armenian art in 2004, the Philippe de Montebello years in 2008, Byzantine and Islam, Age of Transition in 2012, and if you're in the New York area, on September 21st, 2018 through January 13, 2019, there's going to be a special exhibit with the topic of Armenia. She's the president of the International Center for Medieval Art. She's the past president of the Association of Art Museum Curators. She's lectured widely in the United States and abroad. She has taught at the Institute of Fine Arts of New York University, Columbia University, Hunter College, the University of Chicago, and Oberlin College. She's the chair of the board of directors of the Mary Joharis Center for Byzantine Art and Culture at Holy Cross College, and she's the former chair of the editorial board of Art Bulletin. She has several publications, including this one in 1997 called The Glory of Byzantium, Art and Culture of the Middle Byzantine Era, Byzantium, Faith and Power, which came out in 2004, and this book won 2 awards, the George Whittenborg Award in 2004, and the College Art Association Alfred H. Barr Jr. Book Award in 2005. And the third one, Byzantium and Islam, Age of Transition, came out in 2012, and she had the honor of traveling to Tehran, Iran on February 8 in 2014 to accept the 21st Annual World Book Award. In the upcoming year, she's likely to have another book come out on mimesis. She's had an article on mimesis and one other article at least. And she was also involved with Peter Cowie when they were both graduate students, one at Columbia and her at New York University. So now I'm going to invite Peter Cowie to come say a couple of words on Helen C. Evans.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to add a few words to Rupen's excellent overview of our speaker's bio. Byzantium, as a state and civilization, has received a pretty bad rap in the popular mind. Take, for instance, the adjective Byzantine or Byzantine. Added to politics or a company or organization's business model, and it evokes a convoluted labyrinth full of intrigue, plots and counterplots, and ultimately, if you're not careful, a violent end. There again, if we consider the field's intellectual pedigree, we face the challenge of Gibbon's endless tomes on the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, much of it describing the later centuries in the Eastern sphere with monumental judgment and excruciating detail. Again, when we turn to the magnificent achievements of Byzantine art, it is obvious that they have not received the exposure of the Greco-Roman classical world that preceded it, nor the Italian Renaissance that succeeded it. And so the 3 major international exhibitions Dr. Evans has mounted at the Met, together with their catalogues and expert essays that perpetuate their impact into the present, they have really put Byzantine art on the radar of a much larger cross-section, both from academia and from the general population worldwide. Previously, the Met had organized only one similar event devoted to the much, quote-unquote, safer, more mainstream option of the late Roman period, and that was back in 1975. Consequently, we owe it to Helen's vision and execution to fully represent two major periods of Byzantine civilization after the demise of the Western Empire: the middle phase of resurgence and revitalization after the iconoclast dispute, and the very different ambiance of the state's final 3 centuries. In addition, she has provided a very timely exploration of the early interchange between Byzantium and the Caliphate, as the debate between the two religious traditions helped distinguish and crystallize their respective worldviews and aesthetic expression. You might think that a PhD in art history would be the perfect preparation for curating such an exhibition. Certainly, such a scholarly training is crucial in determining the selection of items and their appropriate display. But the job description is actually much more demanding. Entrepreneur, diplomat, fundraiser, troubleshooter, all of these skills and more are demanded of the successful exhibition. Granted the scale, you have to begin planning years in advance to negotiate permission to exhibit the objects, then arrange transportation and insurance. During that time, all sorts of eventualities can be expected, as in the case of the first exhibition, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the proliferation of independent states, each now with its own authorities that have to be approached individually. Nor does the discussion always go smoothly. For example, in the case of the Glory of Byzantium, the director of the Madonna refused to allow manuscripts from his collection to be included, arguing Armenia should be exhibited separately, not in association with Byzantium, though at that period the ruling dynasty and many important families, provincial administrators and military men were Armenian in origin. In the midst of all these responsibilities, Dr. Evans has pursued her own academic research. Indeed, how fortunate for Armenian studies that a scholar like Helen is occupying such a key position at the Metropolitan. Still in the mid-20th century, a trend lingered on in Byzantine studies to dismiss Armenian art as Byzantine provincial, rather than acknowledge its distinct integral core. Similarly, Byzantine historians would regard Armenia as an appendage of the empire, although in fact Byzantine administration of the Armenian plateau lasted less than 50 years in the 11th century. Helen received a rigorous training in Armenian art, architecture, and manuscript illumination at the NYU Institute of Fine Arts under her advisor, Thomas Matthews, who significantly advanced the investigation of this field while here at UCLA, as masterfully displayed in his monograph on the Glatzer Gospels. Helen went on to build on this framework in her extremely innovative doctoral dissertation, focusing on the atelier at the Catholicate in Hromkla in the mid-13th century. There, with great cogency, she demonstrated the significant impact of Franciscan art on figures like Taurus Roslin, increasingly exploiting the dimension of depth in scene depiction and bulk in figural painting in a trajectory leading to Giotto at the end of the century. I have continually returned to her dissertation for insight on this extremely important topic for the understanding of the internal status of the Cilician kingdom, and only regret that it is not more widely accessible in published form. As she now distills her rich experience in the field for us, offering her seasoned reflections on Armenian art in the broad, please join me now in offering Dr. Evans a warm Southern Californian welcome to the podium.
And now we have the person that comes to cope with my limited skills with computers. So I would like to thank everyone who has introduced me so generously, and I hope I don't disappoint you with my version of what we are dealing with. I was asked very specifically to talk about Armenian art at the Met, and so I am going to try to do that in a way that covers what is of interest to you and is of relevance, and to talk about why I think it is very important to make Armenian art and culture relevant to the larger world. And I've got a little image at the top left, because one of the things that makes these things possible is support from others, and the Kevorkian Fund has been very generous to me throughout my entire career. I started at the Met as a Kevorkian Fellow, and with each of my exhibitions, the Kevorkian Fund has put more money into it, and they are very generously supporting Armenia, that will open next fall. I did my dissertation, as Peter told you, on Armenian illumination in the 13th century at Ramkla, and I wanted, from the time I arrived at the Met, to have a show on Armenian art, and it was more difficult than one could recognize, because you have to do something that the museum can understand, and as Peter noted, we had not done anything on East Christian art of any sort since the late 70s, so the first show we did was one that our director would support, The Glory of Byzantium, and its cover is on the right. What I did in that show was to try to argue that the Imperium, from its capital, had a great art tradition, and that the cultures on the periphery of the Imperium adopted, rejected, created their own voices that were related to but not the same as, and that Western Europe and the Islamic world also reacted to Byzantine art, so that it was the center started from Constantinople, not London. And there was a specific chapter for each of these border cultures that we were talking about. And the one on Armenia focused on works that would show that Armenian art was as good as that of the capital. So the Palace Church at Akhtamar, which is a gorgeous little building, which once had a big palace connected to it, or the manuscript Canon tables that you see, which are, to a degree, within the Byzantine tradition, but just exceptionally beautiful works. And again, in 2004, when we did Byzantium, Faith and Power, the last centuries of the Byzantine Empire, and then as you will notice, it does not stop in 1453 with the fall of Constantinople. It extends actually into the age of Suleiman the Magnificent, because he is the last Ottoman ruler to claim to be the Emperor of Byzantium. He is the Emperor of the Romans. And there we again borrowed works, and now we're in the era of Taras Raslin, the peak of the Cilician period, the Walters lent the work on the left, and what my dissertation talked about was that these little figures are the wise virgins, and they are copied directly from a gift that we know that Louis IX, King of France, made to William of Rubruck, a Franciscan scholar who nicely wrote down, showing off the manuscripts that he had to the people he visited, and the Armenians get him. The Armenians of Cilicia get him all the way to the Mongol court. And at that moment in time, I would argue that the Armenians, who are also producing the Skevra Reliquary that's at the Hermitage, believe that they are going to be one of the great powers, that they have the ability to balance the greatest power of the West, the French under Louis IX, and the most powerful military force in the world, that of the East, of the Mongols, because they are the first Christians to be allies with the Mongols that are not conquered. The Armenians, Greater Armenia, of course, are conquered. And after that show, and in connection, I'm sure, with the exhibition at the Louvre of Armenia Sacra, we were able to more successfully than in the past talk with Armenia about a loan to the Met of a work that would make it possible for people to stop. And we had a small case from when we opened the Byzantine galleries in 2000 that related to Armenia, but it was one of many cases you had to know to stop. Up until 2000, from the founding of the Met, East Christian art had never been shown as being important for being the work of its own people. It was always shown, it was always on display, but it was always shown as a source for Western European art. So it wasn't that the Armenians made it or that the Empire of the Romans that we call Byzantium made it. It was that this is a motif that we used in preferably Gothic France. So in 2000, what I was able to do is to say, yes, these are influential, but what's important is how they talk about what their own people want to say. And that then that message from people who are quite powerful does influence Western Europe, but it also influences parts of the Islamic world. And in talking to the Ministry of Culture in Armenia about borrowing a Hochkar, I did this with a colleague, Jack Sultanian, who was tremendously helpful. We sent little packages of information, and you are seeing the map we sent to Armenia saying, if you will lend us a Hochkar, it will be at this spot in the Metropolitan Museum. Come in the front door and go by the great stairs, and it's at the point where the Byzantine world ends and Western medieval starts. The Christmas tree is always displayed here, so we can guarantee half of the people visiting the Met will either go in or out past the Hochkar, because that's the way they get to the Christmas tree. And, of course, most people in Armenia had never seen the Met, so this type of talking and explaining was helpful. And Jack and I went and, with two very nice young men from the Ministry of Culture, went looking for a Hochkar that would be safe to lend, because there'd been a great deal of anger about the work sent to Paris. And far in the north, at the fort of Loriberd, we found this quite exquisite and handsome statement of the commitment of Armenians to Christianity in a world that they do not exist in among other Christians. And this is dated to the late 12th, the very early 13th. Loriberd falls to the Mongols in 1238, so we know it is probably done in the decades before that. And the reason that I love it tremendously and have talked on it at Princeton and other places is that this little square is, I believe, a gospel book, and that what you're seeing is the four gospels, the symbols of the evangelists, so the angel of Matthew, and then the ox, the lion of Mark, and then across the bottom looking like a big scorpion is the ox of Luke, and then coming up the side is the profile of the eagle of St. John. So what you are saying in a world that's under Islamic rule is, out of this book, is the story of the death of Christ for the salvation of mankind that we believe in. And that's very easy for us to do in Southern California. It was I believe, a much more dangerous and courageous thing to do around 1200 in a world that was not totally under its own control. And what has happened with this work, and you're here, I'm showing you several, this is looking down the corridor to it, is it's become a very popular image with our volunteers. And so people that come on a tour to the Metropolitan Museum that are getting a general tour also get told about the Hochkar. It fits, one, it's beautiful, and two, it's large, so it's easy to talk to a group of people about it. And if you are coming from the Christmas tree back to the front door, you see it here. This is a case of things Armenian. You look across from one of the side of the Great Stair to the other, and it's right there on the way into the Renaissance galleries. If you get closer, this is the Armenian case. This is a Crusader case. Right to the left is Rus, to the other side is Western Europe. So it is not of the Byzantine world, it is what it is, a very important place on the periphery. And when Peter talks about how many soldiers and rulers and such are part of the Byzantine Empire, what you have to remember is people don't marry people because they think they're nice, they marry them because they're useful to them. So if you have Byzantine military men who become emperors, if you have marriages into the Armenian state, it's because Armenia is a really powerful state or a really important people that they wish to be allied with. They're not marrying the English at this time. And here is another view of the Armenian Case. And here you see it as it opened with works that we already owned, and here is the way it is right now with the work we bought in 2010. We appear to have acquired, as far as I can tell, random Armenian works at random times for not necessarily very coherent reasons. They often come in as part of other things. They at times are given by very wealthy donors. At times we buy them. So I'm never quite clear what inspired spending the money on them. I'm just always very relieved that somebody did do it. So the two images on your left, we acquired in 1957. It's the front and the back of a leaf that will be in the Armenia exhibition with works from the Madonna and explaining more fully what it's about. And the incipit page to St. John with the eagle somewhere right around there, we got in 1957. What happens is what happens in many places. Since Armenia does not have a large enough footprint in people's minds yet, I hope to change that, it gets subsumed into something else. And at the Met, it goes into Islamic art, because the countries that are where the art we own came from are now largely Muslim-dominated countries. So I borrow forever back from the Islamic department to display these Christian art examples of Armenian quality in our medieval galleries. And so I was incredibly pleased. I'm always incredibly pleased whenever I can get something Armenian, specifically that belongs to the Armenian department, the medieval department. And in 2010, with the support of a number of people, both Armenian and non-Armenians, we were able to buy this Gospels from Mach, done at about the same moment that the Byzantine Empire falls to the Ottoman Turks. And it enables us to be able to talk about an Armenian presence in Greater Armenia and a tradition that, as any of you who love Islamic art can tell, there are moments when they're looking at what is probably good taste in the neighborhood and reflecting connections to Islam, and at the same time you have, like this is the porphyry slab that Christ was thought to have been laid out on at his death, so you have great connections to the larger Christian tradition. And the newest one we have, which is from California, is this is 2 pages, 1 page, 2 sides, of a manuscript by the painter Minas that belonged to a nice lady north of San Francisco who, when she died, her children have been trying to figure out all the things she collected, and they asked me about it, and I told them what it was, and they've now given it to the Met. So we have one more artist, one more example of what is Armenian to rotate at the Met. And for a few years, almost 10 actually, we had an exceptionally wonderful object, which is this Hochy. And this is the one that the Republic of Armenia gave to the United Nations at the declaration of Armenian independence as the Soviet Union collapsed. And it stood, as it stands here, against a travertine wall in the UN. And when the United Nations was being gutted and wonderful, useful things like fire extinguishers added to it, all the countries that were there had to take their things home. And the ambassador from Armenia to the United Nations asked us at the Met to house the Hochy while the UN was being restored, which ended up being 7 or 8 years. So this, although you cannot tell it well, is its presence at the Met, where we had in this wonderfully spotlighted space, and people were incredibly excited by it. But within the last year or so, we returned it when the UN restoration was finished, and the ambassador had a very lovely service event with the Archbishop Arsavian and Archbishop Shaloyan in attendance. So something that we tremendously loved having and that people ask about all the time is now back where it belongs. The earliest object that I can claim in the Met as possibly being Armenian, I would love to be able to say I could prove it was Armenian, is this flask. You can see it larger here with the Archangel Gabriel leading the Magi to the Virgin. We can't prove quite what this is, but the motifs that decorate it are largely in and around the Persian world as opposed to being in and around the Roman world. And as many of you, I'm sure, know, one of the earliest images, you have it downstairs in the library, of Armenian art is this illumination where the Virgin and Child are greeted by the three Magi, presented as Zoroastrian priest-kings. So it's not just the three Magi from the east came, it is that the Christ child whom we have adopted, the faith that we have adopted, is greater than the faith of the empire to our east, and that you are recognizing the greatness of that which we worship. So it's a very major statement in terms of how the Armenians would have viewed it. And right to the side, you have the Archangel Gabriel. So whether one could truly say this Archangel Gabriel is connected to that one, I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that the Armenian Infancy Gospel is the text in which it is told that the Archangel Gabriel, having told the Virgin that she would be the Mother of God, then goes and directs the Magi to Bethlehem. So we talk about the Armenian Infancy Gospel on the label, although I can't totally claim it as Armenian yet. And more distressingly from my point of view, we have some works of great quality that are not medieval, that are Armenian. And they don't fit in my galleries because I am a part of the medieval department, which in the larger sense ends somewhere between 15th and 16th century, depending on exactly what you are claiming at that one moment. So these wonderful book covers from Kaisery, which came from Mrs. Harkness in 1916 into the Met, I have them stored in our storage room, and they're going to be in the exhibition in Armenia, but I can't really put them out in our gallery. What they enclose, which is very important for the theme of the show, is a 13th century manuscript, but one that is so damaged that it won't look very impressive if I put it on display. But it is a statement of how much the Armenians of the 16th, 17th century cared about their history in Cilicia, that they would take a manuscript and trim it, bind it a little, and then put this very expensive and handsome cover on it in recognition of maintaining your own traditions. And yet the manuscript cover is not trying to copy Cilician illuminations. It is one of a number that we'll talk about a little later in the talk, which are very much borrowing from other traditions. And on the far right, this always is in the Islamic department. We have this cope, so it's a vestment for the liturgy. It was acquired by the Met for the textile, which is an Ottoman elaborately worked textile. It was recently in an exhibition we had of interwoven globe as an Ottoman textile, but and all that's true. What's equally true is that the figures across here are Christian saints, including Armenian prelate saints, whose names are identified in Armenian. So it was used by the Armenian church. And so in Armenia, it will be out as an Armenian work made out of an Ottoman textile. In the Islamic galleries, it's an Ottoman textile, which, by the way, was used by the Armenian church. Neither side is trying to say the other is relevant. They're saying it's most important to us for this one thing. So what I am going to talk a little more about tonight is what we hope to do with the exhibition Armenia. And part of what's really wonderful about it to me is, as Peter said, nobody would lend to me for the glory of Byzantium. But now the Montenegrin is lending 30-odd manuscripts to Armenia. And we are borrowing for Armenia from the major repositories of Armenian culture that have protected your traditions over many centuries. So we will be borrowing from the Echmiadzin, from the History Museum and the Montenegrin in the Republic of Armenia, from the Monastery of San Lazzaro in Venice, the Meconium, so your upcoming symposium, from Antilius in Lebanon, so the Church of Cilicia, and we believe, but we'll confirm later this month, that next month, that we are also borrowing exceptional works from the Brotherhood of St. James in Jerusalem. And so what, in part, we want to celebrate is the medieval centuries of Armenia as Armenians have preserved it. There will be some limited loans from elsewhere, but the core of the exhibition is coming from those sites. And we will open it with the beginning of the Christianization of Armenia. So the first monuments and objects that survive, so these will be largely coming from the History Museum. Hochy, who many of you all know, has been doing some wonderful photography for us, and we will be using the photography in the galleries, so to give a sense of a world that most people don't know, and for those of you who know it, I hope something that will make you remember home. So we're particularly thrilled with this little photograph at the moment from Hogbot, although it may lose out in the end because it's got a little model of a church on top, and we're borrowing 4 or 5 models of churches that we'll group around it, one being this very famous one that was cut off the facade of a church at Ani. And we will have stele that may or may not relate to the tradition of the conversion of King Tridot. We're waiting for Gregorian, the director of the History Museum in Armenia, to decide which way he's going to go on that. And then we will be borrowing from EVANS as a capital from there, and we'll be borrowing a number of other architectural elements. I want people to know that Armenians did manuscripts, but much more than manuscripts. And the Treasures in Heaven that I was part of was a fantastic show, but by the virtue of what it could borrow, it borrowed manuscripts, and it left the impression that Armenians did manuscripts, but didn't do anything about where they lived, what they sat on, what they wore. We want to correct that. And to help do that, we're borrowing this and 14 other pieces from a hoard of jewelry that has never been shown, that has been found at Devin. Devin is one of the earliest sites for monuments directed toward Christianity. It is the site of many important councils, including the one that rejects union with Constantinople. And into the 13th century, it is one of the most important trade route cities in the world. It is destroyed, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't important before it was destroyed. And we are focusing on that Armenia is important for its early conversion for Christianity, for how that conversion helps Armenians create a sense of identity that allows them to, in a way, remain together as they disperse, both for profit along trade routes and because somebody has driven them out from where they were. And we start in the homeland of Armenia at the foot of Mount Ararat, and we are borrowing a wonderful map that you all may probably don't know about. It was done by Matthew Paris, an English monk in England in the 12th century, and it's the first map of the world. And he asks visiting Armenian prelates who are in England where Noah's Ark is. And they tell him it's in Armenia, and what it's like, and that it's surrounded by snakes that protect it. And in the map, you've got 2 little mountaintops, a boat, and then snakes around the edge protecting it. And it is labeled Armenia. And then in the description of the map, it says the Armenians control everything to the east, and it's at the very top, the easternmost edge of the map of the known world, and it says Armenia controls everything after that, China and India, which is perhaps a little optimistic for your actual control, but undoubtedly very accurate for what trade goods flow through your hands. And we want to make people understand that you are part of the larger issues of the world's art because you are involved in it at all times. And in the middle Armenian centuries, the more central 1000 and on Middle Ages, we will be in Armenia, and we will be focusing on sites that are important for a variety of reasons. We have the Loriberd, which is to the north. We have the Amir Hassan, who's from the facade of his churches, and below it we have this phenomenally beautiful reliquary that his father donated. So we're going to be tracking families, we're going to be tracking artists, we're going to be trying to make it something other than this is Armenian, and nobody was involved in creating it. And at the far side you'll see the portrait of St. Chichi as he is preaching to his pupils at the monastery of Gladzor, one of the great intellectual centers, not just of Greater Armenia, but of the larger world at that time, and a place that describes itself as a second Athens. So not something that sees itself as unconnected to the larger world, but rivaling Athens of Pericles and in Greece, and having classical learning there as well as religious learning. And we're bringing a number of manuscripts from there, including some that had not previously been attributed to there. So we will have a center around that. And then those forces should go back. These all are occurring actually during a period that we think of as the Mongol occupation of Armenia. And it is certainly true that the Mongol occupation for many people is a very devastating thing. But there are a number of Armenians who flourish in this period because what the Armenians end up doing is you run the trade routes of the Mongols from the Mediterranean to the Pacific and from Russia throughout their territories. And while we don't always think of these different groups being Mongols are being connected, the Ilkhanids, who are the Mongols that convert to Islam, are the brother of the Golden Horde in Moscow, are the brother of the Yuan dynasty in China, and their trade routes flow back and forth, and these are routes that you all have already been controlling for centuries, and you continue to control them. And in the kingdom that you have established in Cilicia, not because you necessarily meant to move there, but because the Byzantine emperor has forced the relocation earlier of a number of Armenians. The Armenians of Cilicia build a series of powerful fortresses that guard trade routes. And you have the port at Ayas, and from there, people coming from the west enter to reach Greater Armenia and then on to China. And what my dissertation was dealing with was, to a degree, the extent that the Armenians of Cilicia are dealing with their immediate neighbors in ways that we don't always recognize. The Armenians of Cilicia have the best army. You have, in the 1260s, the king's brother goes to the Mongols, you sign a peace treaty, you're the first Christian nation that has a peace treaty with the Mongols as opposed to having just been beaten up by the Mongols. And you also, because of the quality of your military and because your elite have intermarried with the Crusader kingdom's elite, so the Prince of Antioch's wife is Armenian. Melisende of Jerusalem is half Armenian. As you work your way up and down the Crusader states, you are always part of, I'm sure you're part of the regular military too, but you're always part of the highest level of elite society, so you are of importance to them. And in exchange, you see images like this is the Madonna of the Franciscans, because the image that Duccio painted, the kneeling figures are Franciscans, not the members of the Hetumen family's most elite aristocracy. And what I love about this is Archbishop John in this image is wearing a robe that's with the Fleur-De-Lis of France, and the Armenians are heavily intermarried with the Lusignans of Cyprus, who are a cadet family of the kings of France. And we'll see him again in a few minutes. He's gone in another direction. We will have the reliquary arm of St. Nicholas from Antilius, and this is really very wonderful of them because I borrowed it in 2004, so they understand the importance of trying to make the importance of Armenia recognized. And the catalog author for it is Anna Balian in Greece, whose husband's family are the Balians, of the architects of late 19th century Ottoman Turkey and the Dolmabahce Palace. And then we hope, we pray, we will get the Queen Quran Gospel from Jerusalem. It looks like maybe, if you all will cross your fingers, maybe it will really come true. But what it offers us is exactly what the Armenians thought they were going to be in the second half of the 13th century, and that is the most powerful Christian nation in the East. So, Queen Quran, whose relatives are here, and King Levan, a member of the Hetumen dynasty, if you look at it, are wearing robes lined with ermine, as here, which is what the Crusader elite wear, but their garb is that of the Byzantine emperor and empress. So they see themselves as the new Rome's replacement, that they will be what had been the power of the people of Constantinople. And when this is done, Constantinople has just spent about half a century under Latin West control and is still a very enfeebled version of what it once had been. It's not an irrational thing. They are allies with the two most powerful forces in the world. Nobody else has those balances. What goes wrong, of course, is that the Mongols do not remain the most frightening military force in the world. The Mamluks from Egypt come up and beat them up. And so everything shifts, and the paradigms of power shift. But there is a legitimate period in the 13th century where if it was the foreign ministry of England or our foreign office, you had every reason to think you were going to be this incredible power, and you are bringing with you all sorts of new ideas. We have records of how the kings of Cilicia knight their children in the French style. You are woven into the world society. And when that collapses, we'll follow the members of that world who go further west, who go to Kaffa and into Italy, and their manuscripts produced there that draw upon both Greater Armenian and Cilician traditions. It's interesting to see who's coming together. And we will go back to Armenia, to Greater Armenia, and we hope that our designer can use the fantastic photographs that Hope took of that lovely little church that's the Church of the Theological School at Lake Savan, which I'm hoping is small enough that when we collapse it further as an evocation of an Armenian church in the exhibition galleries, it will look proportionately right. And we are anticipating having this space which will give you something of the dark, the kind of cave-like wonderful space that Armenian churches have in Greater Armenia, and that we will have projected chant and what other Father Asagik tells me is an appropriate Armenian readings from liturgical text. I have not yet gotten his approved text, but it's his church, so I'm not going to fight him. And what we will have is the photographs will give us the raised apse that Armenian churches have, and on the floor where the nave is, where we, the congregation, are normally, we will have a lectern from the History Museum and the UCLA manuscript leaf that shows the same type of lectern being used as Christ preaches in the temple. And we will have several reliquaries, one of the more wonderful ones being the reliquary of the true lands, the Holy Lands, that was the whole name for and the importance of the monastery of Gegard, which is where the Hochy that's at the United Nations came from. So I'm hoping that that Armenians coming through will feel like they are in Armenia, but as importantly, the people that don't know about Armenia will find in this a sense of what makes Armenian architecture so importantly unique and yet part of the Christian world. And we will look at the manuscripts that go with the area around Vospora-Khan, because you have this explosion of really quite fascinating manuscripts. Not all of them are done by incredibly well-trained artists. Some are. Sylvie Marion, who I understand will be speaking here later, I hope, who has done wonderful work. Peter and I were both in graduate school around her time on scriptoria. So she is writing on scriptorium practices. Anna Laloyan, who is tracked artist from father to son to grandson, is putting many of these together. And so Sylvie will be working with this leaf from the Getty, where the scribes are here, and their apprentices whose names she has now identified are polishing the paper. Because, as you all know, Armenians use paper far earlier than many other Christian communities, and that's, again, part of your role on the trade routes. We will have from Venice this model book of motifs that were copied to be moved around, and this is this wonderful composite creature, so that you've got what looks to me like a griffin, but is in fact in both of the books that we will have copied from, the horse that Alexander the Great rode. So we will be able to see it as it was sketched and as people copied it and then copied it further on. You can watch an artist moving an idea. Hakab of Yolfa, who is an important artist in that he works in Yolfa and then he works in New Yolfa, so you have him moving an Armenian of Greater Armenia tradition into the world of Isfahan. This is the creation of the world that he begins several of his manuscripts with, and you may not know this, but this is God. He is creating the world, and this is the entrance to heaven on the seventh day. So it has just wonderful images. We're borrowing several works by him so you can see his development as an artist. And then here, Hachitor of Hizan, it's at the Walters. We all love it. It is one of the most wonderful images. It's the Easter image, of course, of the Orthodox world, the descent into Hades, the anastasis. But what makes it so fantastic here is this blinding ray of whiteness, that red edges looking like some type of neon sign drives back the dark of Hades and shows Christ raising an Adam and Eve from their tomb as he stands out Hades and the trampled gates of heaven, as John the Baptist and I think it's Solomon are kneeling watching him. It is the work of a superb artist. There will be other works in the show that show the same tradition, but this is one that's gone from being good to being great. And it introduces the type of works that contemporary artists are totally aimed at. And then we will go out along the trade routes of the period of the Ottoman and Persian empires. We are not looking at the Armenians under the Ottomans or the Armenians under the Persians. We're looking at the Armenians running the trade routes through the Ottoman and Persian empires. And so we have the very book cover that we have from Kayseri, and the gold picks in the Gulbenkian, and the images on these come from the Vatican Bible that we'll see in just a second. This is coming from Antilius, and it is the making of a holy chrism, and again on a cover for a 13th century manuscript. This will be coming from the Etchmiadzin, and it is a Kutaya work with an inscription in Armenian. What the author of the material is arguing is that the blue and white patterns on these are Chinese patterns that she believes the Armenians in New Jolfa are bringing into Kutaya and introducing it into Ottoman ceramics. And then we have this wonderful hanging that is sacred spaces to the Armenians in Jerusalem. So we'll be able to talk about where, if you went on pilgrimage to Jerusalem, you would certainly go to the Holy Sepulchre, which anyone else would go to, but you would also go to sites that are of specific interest to the Armenian community. And as we reach the end of the show, we will be with the Armenians removed from Julfa, moved to Isfahan, made in control of all external trade for the Persian Empire by Shah Abbas. And we are borrowing from the Islamic department at the Met, whose department head, Sheila Canby, did a wonderful show at the British Museum several years ago on the age of Shah Abbas. And she opened it with a gallery on the Armenians, because all external trade went through the Armenians. And they are therefore the critical moment in it. And this is a wonderful portrait of an Armenian prelate whom she believes she can identify as one of the heads of the church, coming from Etchmiadzin to be officially installed in his office by one of the heads of the Safavid dynasty. And of course, you know the cathedral and the internal jewel box ambience. And the Voskan Bible, which is, I'm sure all of you know better than I do, was printed in Amsterdam. Well, it is printed in Amsterdam with expertise coming from both the Armenians of Constantinople and the Armenians, and particularly the money of New Jolfa. So it is both of the far western end of the trade route and of the Armenians that are still much within the center of the Armenian world. And we end the show with the widespread introduction of printed material to the Armenians in the East, because the idea in general is the medieval world ends when the printed press replaces the handwritten manuscript. And because the printed book is reluctantly accepted by the powers in the East, it is later there than it would be if we were talking about the Gutenberg Bible at its home. We will have several works which hopefully will help people understand that you have taken your national history. This is a manuscript of the period. I've given you the wrong page because I've given you the bad Persians as opposed to Meconium being defeated by them in the great battle of the 5th century, but the elephants are adorable. A number of images of Armenian prelates. This is the earlier Cilician monk prelate, Psyches Pitzak. This is the brother John with a much younger age that we saw earlier in Fleur-De-Lis. And here, when you get down to the bottom of his vestments, he is wearing Chinese dragons. So these are goods that are coming from the Yuan dynasty into the silk trade. And in those two images, you have the two ends of the silk trade route, and in all of them, you've got the wealth of the Armenians, because you don't put gold leaf on manuscripts if you don't have money. It's just not the first thing you use. This is two figures from a huge piece we'll have that was in a recent exhibition at the Met on the art of the Deccan in India. Armenians in this period control all internal and external textile trade for India. And this hanging that we'll borrow is actually to show one of the rulers of these little states in the Deccan of India, but in the figures that surround it are a number of Armenians as merchants who are welcomed at his court, who have been approved of him at his court. We will have in the labels Rousseau writes the philosopher Rousseau, that he chooses to wear the dress of an Armenian merchant. So all those pictures we all know of him looking in something vaguely orientalizing, that's a specifically Armenian merchant clothing. The Armenian merchants are so highly respected and valuable that Western Europeans trying to go do trade in that part, in the eastern part of the world, dressed as Armenians to be more acceptable. And then, most generously, the Catholicos from HVSN is lending this hanging, or actually probably an altar cloth that hangs behind his throne in his audience hall at HVSN, and it kind of, to me, summarizes all that we're after. A 17th century embroidery fabric that covers the external trade. The flowers are very much in an Indian style, so the Indian end of it. King Tridot, Gregory the Illuminator, so the conversion of the Armenians at the beginning. Christ throwing the hammer that will be the site of Echmiazin as it exists when this is being woven so much as it is today, and bringing together a span of a little more than a millennium where, because of your religion, because of the language that is developed for the translations of text, the alphabet of Mesrop-Mashtots, you have a way to link yourself together in all the places you live, some of which you are in greater authority. In Amsterdam, you're not in control, but you are always significant. And the totality of it is that by the end of this show, you are, for Shah Abbas, admittedly, you're in Latin America buying gold and silver for his court. You are using silk as the coin of the realm with which you get the gold and silver. And as you will all know from a show that's opening in the next year or so, you are among the first settlers that survive in the New World, because there is an Armenian named, by that time, Martin, at Jamestown, Virginia in 1618. Why he's there is a really great question. We hope that by bringing all of these elements together, we will have been able to do what my former director, who approved of the borrowing of the Hochy reluctantly, said when he published it in a book. Philippe de Montebello, who very nicely said to me one time, "That is really handsome, Helen. I had thought it would be awful." That's what you like your director to tell you. It is so good looking, it could be French. It could be from Normandy, because if we approved of anything, it became French. I didn't care where it came from. It had to be of the quality of the French. So the Hochy is of the quality of the French. And when he wrote a book, Rendezvous with Art, several years after he retired, the only Western medieval work that he included from the Metropolitan Museum was the Armenian Hochy. And in his statements about it, one, he talked about how it reflected the destruction of Armenian Hochy in Azerbaijan, but more importantly for what we're talking about tonight, it's that he was saying that by having the Hochy at the Met, it was assigning Armenian art a place in the history of Christian art. And that if it was successful in having people understand its importance, it would make it was in its existence, and if it was successful, it would achieve placing Armenian art within the canon of art history. And so what we are trying to do is to make Armenians extremely proud of an incredibly great tradition that is really important, but we're also hoping to make non-Armenians like me understand that your art is not something that is only something you could appreciate and is only of value to you, that it is part of the canon of art history. So I would say that if we are truly successful within a decade, that if you are reading a survey of the history of art, we should have Octomar in it. We should have a Cilician manuscript, that Armenia should be included in what you do when you do a survey of art history. So that is our goal, and I hope that you all think we may achieve it, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you for having me. Question?
Thank you very much, Dr. Evans, for a really splendid talk. I'm going to have to get my ticket to come to New York to see the exhibition.
September 21st, Symposium November 3rd, closing January 13th, so you can come back Christmas, your Christmas or the general Christmas. I don't care which, just come.
I have many questions, but I'm going to limit myself. Okay, can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
At what point in Christian history does the use of the symbols of the eagle, the ox, and so forth enter? And then, more importantly, for the Armenians, when does it enter the Armenian iconographic period? I mean, the four symbols of the four evangelists.
We're not altogether certain ever of anything we say, but it's a general thing. We believe that the symbols of the evangelists, as the Armenians use them, which is in the order of St. Jerome. The evangelist symbols are the creatures of the vision. But you can sort them out in different ways. And the Byzantines don't usually seem to sort them in the order of St. Jerome, nor do they use them as symbols of the evangelist very often. But they do appear in Western medieval art. And my dissertation would argue that they enter into Armenian art in a widespread way, probably through connections of the Armenians of Ramkla with the Benedictine order around Antioch. But certainly in a connection that goes back and forth there. There are Armenian references to figures that may be meant to be figures of the evangelists, but not quite in the same style earlier than that. And then that design goes from Cilicia into Greater Armenia and remains popular. And that Canon table with the eagle at the top, that's copied from manuscripts we know at Skevra at the end of the 1100s through New Jaffa. I'm not even sure when, to an Armenian, it becomes anything other than a reference to the greatness of New Jaffa, of Cilicia. But I don't know quite why, but it's just a really popular image. Anyone else? I can.
Thank you for your informative lecture. We learned a lot. And I am particularly concerned about other holdings your museum has that come under the Armenian cultural heritage. Yet, as many other museums, your museum also labels them as either Anatolian, Ottoman, or Turkish. Is your museum planning to relabel those cultural heritage that belong to Armenia? Relabel them as Armenian, such as carpets, for example. Your museum has a fabulous holding, fabulous collection, yet they all are mislabeled.
So I would regretfully have to tell you that those carpets are in the Islamic department, and historically the Islamic department has had very little interest in what the medieval department thinks about anything. I think that the chance, this is quite serious. Sheila Canby, who is the head of that department, is in fact very interested in Armenian art. So it's not like she's saying it's irrelevant. With the image that she wrote about for the catalog, she's more interested in the man who painted the Armenian Prelate, and he is a Muslim artist. So she would catalog it by the man who painted it, and I would catalog it by what it's shown, and we're both right. What I hope will happen is that if this exhibition and others that it will help, and Armena Sakra that the Louvre has already done, can spark a sufficient interest in what is Armenian, then that will lead to people wanting that relabeling done to be more accurate. I think Peter would agree that more and more symposia include Armenian papers that would have, when we were in graduate school, have said the Armenians are irrelevant to the Byzantine world, the Armenians are irrelevant to the Islamic world, so we talk to each other. And we've already managed to make other people say, as with the Glory of Byzantium, you cannot ignore this art. When I went to graduate school at Columbia, no Western medieval historian took any course on Byzantine art because it was viewed as irrelevant. And I don't think that you can, as a student doing a medieval history topic now, automatically write off the Christianese. So what I'm now trying to say is, it's not the Christianese, it is also specifics within the Christianese. And Armenia is one of the finest examples of a specific that ought to be recognized for what it does, what it creates. And I cannot make Sheila Canby relabel anything. She can't make me relabel anything. But we can create enough interest in the field that's being ignored to make it relevant. And in the past, that has worked at the Mint. It does take a few years, but it has worked. So that's what the best I can answer you is I hope to get to what you want, but I can't give it to you tomorrow. Okay, so number one, the budget is appalling, and it's $2.230 million. It will cost $1 million to pack and ensure the works coming from the Republic of Armenia. And what that means is, and it's what we do for anything we borrow, and it's what we require for anyone that borrows from us. A major shipping company and our own experts or the other sites' experts oversee packing and crates that are packed so that when you drop it, it doesn't break. They are then taken with security to an airport. They are loaded into the cargo section. The people from the institution, the couriers, go with the works. They do get to sit in the passenger section. When you arrive in our case, the United States, the packing company's people meet the objects, the courier meets the objects. They're delivered to the Met. They are locked in a room which is a bank vault. They are only opened with the courier from the lending institution present. They are installed in the case where they will be displayed. That case with its label is shut in their presence. That case is not reopened until the show is over. When the couriers come back, watch us unpack it, watch it be packed for return to the country. So we pay for people to be in New York for several days each way. We pay whatever the insurance, the lender believes is accurate. Now, if you tell me it's worth $5 billion, I will probably tell you I can't borrow it. But it is your right to tell me what it means to you, and I have borrowed in the past from countries whose loan values were ridiculous, the legal loan value is what it would sell for if it went to auction next week. But the emotional loan value, the Liberty Bell is a broken bell, for an American example. So if you were selling it for what it's worth as a bell, it's a broken bell, so it's not worth that much. If you sell it for what it means to the traditions of the history of America, it's invaluable. So where between the traditions of the history of America and it actually should be melted down for slag because it's broken, do you value things? And we respect what people think things are worth. We do not have all the money. We have a very generous grant from the Kevorkian. We are working very hard for money. We have some grant requests out. The end result will be that when we get what we get, I have to start cutting if it doesn't match what it costs. And that is not aimed at me and Armenia, although I will take it that way. Last year it was done to Jerusalem, and it was just done to Michelangelo. It's part of the reality of the cost of an exhibition. The catalog itself is just under $500,000. Hochy is doing all the photography of all the Armenian works and some of the non-Armenian works, and then we have catalog authors. They like to be paid for what they do, and we have the whole process of putting out a book, which I want to be of a quality that it will be a long-time standard, because if you tomorrow want to look at the Glory of Byzantium from 1997 or Byzantine Faith and Power from 2004, you can go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art's website and look up art and then publications and then type in the name of one of those shows, and you can download the whole catalog for free. And both of those books are still widely used as college courses. So we believe that we're not doing something that's on for 3.5 months and then is forgotten. We believe that this is successful. It will be something that will have a resonance after that. I know when we did the Glory of Byzantium, a man told me he got a job because a school that had no interest in a Byzantine historian and suddenly realized it was important. I'd like to think after Armenia, someone doing Armenian history could get hired because they've suddenly realized that is important. You asked the horrible question of who did not lend to me something I wanted. Well, first of all, I can't pick up a building, so it's always difficult in an art museum to figure out how to represent the architecture that, particularly a place like the Armenians, where the architecture is so important. We've borrowed bits and pieces. We will do what we can to make that real. There were a few manuscripts from the Montenegro that they felt they simply couldn't risk lending. Many cultures, not just Armenians, are afraid to send something across the ocean to the New World. And I have colleagues at the Met who are afraid to send things from the Met across the ocean to the Old World. So we have enough to do 95% of what I wanted with the objects themselves, and for the others we'll put photographs in the catalog. I've been turned down for 2 loans of what I actually sent loan papers for. And I will make up for those too. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yes.
How long it took you? How many years to do this project?
Well, I would say that she's asking how many years it took me to do the project. Well, I started lobbying for an Armenian show in 1991. But in terms of this particular show, it will open a little more than 4 years after we started seriously working on it. Is that it?
Let's give a big hand to Dr. Evans. We have a reception downstairs, so we can all go downstairs and talk to her and talk with her. Thank you, Dr. Evans.
Thank you all very much for coming. I know it's a hard thing in LA to get out and drive on the freeways, so I appreciate it.